So we're talking about a life of growth, and I wanted to start with talking about the Devos Institute. Do I have that right? Is that what it was called?
You do have that right. So the Devos family is part of the starting of Amway, and the Devos Institute actually got started because Mr. Devos has bought the Orlando Magic. He had all these basketball players coming in that didn't know Jesus, had struggle reading, and just discovered they didn't have any youth guidance growing up, except for on the court or their coaches. And so Mr. DeVos decided that he was going to try to change that. And so he started this institute, and it's really for folks that are entering into urban ministry. And so it's a 1.5 year long program, and it's all over the country where they bring in small cohorts of 8 to 10 people from a city and really train them in youth ministry. And part of that is really trying to hope that youth ministers are well equipped and have some longevity in the field.
And
so that's,
and you got into that through City Gospel?
I did. And so there's actually 3 cohorts. One's going on right now, which is kind of a little odd in the midst of COVID, but there's kind of 3 runs through a city. They go about 1.5 years, and then they do it every about 3 years. And that's really to, again, build a core in the city of youth ministers who have been well trained and have a passion for urban youth. And so there was a group from City Gospel Mission that was talking about that, and you go through an interview process to find out if you're going to be part of that cohort.
Remind me when that was that you got into that.
Well, I was in the 2nd cohort, and so it happened 2 years before I left North. So I don't know how long ago that is. I'm not good with time.
4 years ago, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, 4 or 5 years ago.
And so, and you did a lot of reading for that, and there was some group stuff as well. And was there something? What was the most valuable thing that you think you learned or that you took away from that?
There was a lot of reading. A lot of it was dealing with time management in ministry. Some of that was connection with your neighborhood and connection with other youth ministers. And I think the connection piece was probably the biggest takeaway for me, and really connecting with neighborhoods and connecting with folks both who are following Jesus as well as other connections in the neighborhood. And so for us at North, that part of that was, connecting with Tommy across the street. We had a connection with the photo shop that's right next to Tom and Hilda in the
firehouse.
So a lot of those Valentine's Day candies and stuff that came our way came because of that connection. We connected with folks down at the bank, and a lot of our volunteers for Whiz Kids came from Northside Bank as part of that connection. So for me, the big piece was recognizing that God wants to work in the community with both Christians and non-Christians, and He's really kind of helped me in that whole building of relationships and seeing that, even that that God really designed for us to do this in community with one another. And so really looking for other people to do in community. And now I'm in a job where my connections are all about community and building that community among different churches in the city.
It's interesting to me, Gary, that you've never been shy about sharing your struggle with reading, and yet, as I've known you, you're always reading something, and I know, and I know that you listen to podcasts and you watch YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like you're always like reading something. And a lot of times we'd have conversations and I say, I was just reading about so-and-so. And you say, oh yeah, I read that book. You'd already read it. So it seems to me like learning is really important to you. It's like a core value. I don't know if you identify it as a core value, but it certainly comes across that way. And I just wondered if that was the case and where it came from. For you, this sort of desire to learn more and grow?
Yeah, I tend to think of myself as a lifelong learner. That really, when I've stopped learning, I've stopped living. And it kind of came out of a couple of places. One a good place and one a bad place. One is I really got tired of people going, "You stupid kid," growing up and struggling with my dyslexia, and so there was a part of me that just said, "Well, I'm going to prove that wrong," and just really began to engage in junior high and high school in lots of reading of a lot of self-help books, a lot of I like knowing how things are made and why people made the decisions that they did, and so on. The other piece really has come out of the fact that I believe that God's called me to share the gospel with youth and particularly inner city families, and I really want to do that well. I want God to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and so I keep going to things like Devos and reading books in my field, just because I want to do things well. And I recognize that I also forget stuff. Joanne joked about the fact that I could teach a lot of the classes that we had at Devos, and that was true. There were a lot of things that there weren't new surprises, or it felt like the things that we were doing at North were ahead of the curve there. But I also recognize that in my life, I forget stuff along the way, and it's helpful to have those reminders going back to the basics and engaging. So,
do you find it fun to learn?
I do find it fun to learn. I love learning new things, and I like puzzles, which is part of the reason I kind of like being in ministry. And it's one of the reasons I kind of am a people watcher and so on. I want to know why people make the decisions that they make, and what brought you to that place and so on. Because I know a lot of my decision making really came from my Christian walk and wanting to get to know Jesus better and really trusting that he had a better way of living than I did. And so part of that engagement with other folks has really been going and saying, well, what drove you to that? And let me share with you about kind of the driving factor and how my Christian walk has led me to make these decisions.
This may be an impossible question to answer, but as you think back of your walk with Christ, your journey, what was sort of the biggest, or was there a moment when no, that's not the way to put it. what do you think was sort of the most important thing that you learned, or way that you've changed the most along the way, or grown the most?
You know, one of the things I recognize is I grew up in evangelical church, and with some pretty structured family. And I had a real sense of what was right and what was wrong in there. And I felt like I had clarity when it came to scripture about what was right and what was wrong. I think the thing that I've learned over the years has been that I have just one. When we talk about the elephant being looked at from,
Can you say that again? Because it just froze up for a minute. You said over the years, I have just one.
so over the years, I've had kind of one driving perspective from my background, because you can only see from where you're standing.
Yeah.
And then there's the story of an elephant and some blind men describing what they see when they feel it. And, you know, one's feeling the trunk and talks about it as a snake, and another one's feeling a leg and talks about it as a tree, and another one feels the tail and talks about it being like a rope. You know, I've come to realize that even in our Christian walk, in our walk in life, that I need to step back and try to take a look from somebody else's vantage point in there. And that just adds a whole bunch of clarity and a whole bunch of grace. And so I feel like I've learned to be more gracious over the years when I go and say, what did they go through today that made them come to this point? There's one girl in our youth group that
You just faded out there for a minute. I'm sorry.
So there's one girl in our youth group who came there, was angry. She ended up throwing over a table and throwing basketballs at some of the other guys and cursing, and went out in the parking lot, and Joanne and I were trying to figure out, do we need to call the police over this young lady? And as we just talked to her while she's so angry, what we didn't know was that was her birthday, that her mom, she just watched her mom be handcuffed and taken away by the police, that her dad was supposed to meet her at UDF and he didn't show. And so she had had this lousy day, and it just all came out in that one moment. And I think that's part of the learning that I've had, is that, you know, people's lives are messy and complicated. And before I pass judgment and think about what a good Christian should do, I just need to take a step back and pay attention what else might be going on in their life. How do I stand on a different mountaintop and look down at this situation?
That's really good. That's really good. Is there some growing edge that you have right now?
You know that that's true. That the growing edge for me has really been about loving. You read about the religious guys who.
Start again with the growing edge, because it froze up.
The growing edge for me has been about loving your neighbor. In the Bible, we talk about loving your neighbor with this story of the Good Samaritan. And we tend to go and say we should be good Samaritans. But I think that Jesus really meant, I want you to love your actual neighbor. You know, the guys in your neighborhood and the men and women in your neighborhood. And I was good at loving people outside, but it's a whole different story when I have to love the person, you know, that my lawn touches against, and they get to see my world day in, day out there. And so, and my neighbors don't all know Jesus and do some things that irritate me. And got one neighbor that, you know, has a rolling concert in his car usually coming home at about 11, 12 o'clock at night, and it's rattling my windows that I don't feel very loving towards. But I think that God is saying, I want you to be the light of Jesus to those people. And so my cutting edge has really been saying, how can I love my neighbors, not put them off, but really care for them, so much so that they would have to ask, what's happened in your life, Gary? And some of it means I have to eat crow because there's a neighbor across the street that I've known for 30 years, however long I've been in this house. And it wasn't until this past year that I knew his first name. And so, some of that's like, oh, I haven't been a good neighbor. Let's get to know one another. And so I've been inviting neighbors over for when it was warm to have dinner in my backyard.
Cool. That's really good, Gary. Is there anything else you would want to say about a life of growth?
I think that God is continually working on us, that we have not arrived, and that He really wants us to become all that we can be, more so than we did our kids. And so I think it's pleasing to the Lord when He looks at us and watches us grow in new ways and become more and more like Him. And so my hope is that people would one day mistake me for Jesus in the ways that we grow. I hope that for all of the people at North.
That's great. Hey, thanks a lot, Gary. This is really good.
Thanks for asking.